some of the ways that God directs our steps. One of the ways that he directs our steps is through painful times. Now, for that, I want to look at Joseph in the book of Genesis. Joseph 37 through 50 is the story of his life. I think most of you will know the story. Remember, Joseph was the firstborn of Jacob's best wife, Rachel, and the father gave him a special coat. Now, that wasn't just beautiful clothing. That had a meaning to it. The meaning was that Joseph was to be the leader of the clan and get a double inheritance. That was the birthright that Joseph received. Well, the brothers were very jealous of Joseph and hated him for that. And then when Joseph had some dreams that implied that he would one day be ruling over them, they hated him all the more. So when he was sent by his father to check on his brothers and the flock, they had their opportunity to take vengeance. So they sold Joseph as a slave into Egypt. Well, Joseph got into Egypt as a slave, and he was accused of pussyfooting around with his boss's wife. Ended up in prison. He spent 13 years in prison. Joseph, the shepherd boy that was going to lead the clan, is now in prison for 13 years. Well, some of his fellow prisoners had dreams, and Joseph was gifted at interpreting dreams. So one was the chief cupbearer that brought wine to the king. He tasted a little bit of the wine to show the king it wasn't poisonous. The other was the chief baker. So the chief cupbearer had a dream of 3 branches of grapes. And Joseph said, yeah, in 3 days you will be released, and you will bring wine before the king. So the chief baker, seeing the good interpretation of his dream, said, oh, I had a dream too. I had 3 loaves of bread on my head, and the birds were eating from it. Joseph said, in 3 days you'll be hanged. And that's exactly what happened. And Joseph was saying to the cupbearer, please remember me. But he didn't. He forgot Joseph. So 13 years in that prison. And finally, the Pharaoh had a dream. And the Pharaoh called the magicians. Now, the Egyptian word for magicians is sesperank. Sesperank means house of life. Actually, they were scribes of the house of life. It was a religious organization. It was sort of an Egyptian evangelical school of theology, if you will. And they had a dream book. That was their Bible, their dream book. And in the dream book, they would learn how to interpret dreams. Like if an owl, you dreamed that an owl or something was on the wire, that was a bad omen. If the moon turned dark at night, that was another bad omen. A total eclipse of the sun was a disaster. So they had this dream book, but when they opened the dream book, they couldn't find any interpretation for Pharaoh's dream. So the chief cupbearer said, hey, wait a minute. There's a Hebrew in the prison that interpreted my dream and the chief baker's dream, and it happened just exactly as he interpreted. I was freed, and the chief baker was hung. Bring the boy. So they brought Joseph, and he interpreted the Pharaoh's dream. He said there's going to be 7 years of prosperity, followed by 7 years of famine. And Joseph gave the advice. Maybe it would be a good idea during the years of prosperity to save grain so that in the years of drought we'll have food. And Pharaoh said, well, who's better and wiser than you, Joseph? And so the Pharaoh made Joseph the governor of all the land of Egypt. This shepherd boy in the land of Canaan is now the governor of all the land of Egypt. And as such, he gets to marry a very beautiful young lady, the daughter of the priest of On, and he has 2 children. Just to get a little glimpse of the pain that he went through is how he named his children. His firstborn was Manasseh, means to forget. For God has made me forget all of my trouble and all of my father's household. So you can imagine as he's in prison for those 13 years, thinking about his father, thinking about his mother, even how his brothers betrayed him, thinking about that for 13 years. Now, he's the governor of all the land of Egypt. His second-born was named Ephraim, means fruitful. For God has made me fruitful. Where? In the land of my affliction. It gives you a little insight into Joseph's suffering. So sometimes the Lord will lead us into painful times. Another way that God can determine our steps is by changing our career. For this, let's look at Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 1. In Ezekiel chapter 1, in the first verse, it says, in the 30th year. 30th year of what? That's how old he was. He had his birthday. His 30th birthday. Now we are told that he was a priest. And the priest begins his service at 30 years old. So I'm sure that Ezekiel was long looking forward to being a priest serving in the temple in Jerusalem. But then disaster struck, and he was taken into captivity. And now he is by the Kebar River in Babylon, and he's 30 years old, long, long way from the temple. He's never going to be a priest. But what does it say? The heavens were open, and I saw visions of God. Ezekiel was to be a prophet, and he was a great prophet. You see, if Ezekiel had been a priest in Jerusalem, you would have never heard about it. But he became a prophet. He was trying to tell the people who were in exile with him, don't think about going back to Jerusalem anytime soon. It's not going to happen. It's like the pandemic. We thought, maybe a couple of weeks the shutdown will last. Well, I don't know. I don't know how long was it here in Uganda. In the U.S., it was about a year. And at the end of the year, everything had changed. The whole world had changed. And that's what Ezekiel is trying to tell these people in exile with him. Don't think about going back to Jerusalem. You're here to stay. And just to illustrate that, his wife died. Which was symbolic of the fact that Jerusalem would fall. But then there was hope. When Jerusalem actually fell, Ezekiel saw a new world coming. And we have that in our Bibles. We can read it. The valley of dry bones becoming living human beings. You know, this great temple with the water flowing down into the Dead Sea and giving life to the Dead Sea. There's a new world coming, and Ezekiel is the foundation prophet of telling us about this new world. And the New Testament is made more clear in the book of Revelation. So Ezekiel, the priest, never got to be a priest. He was a prophet, and what a great prophet he was. Another way that God can direct our steps is by correcting our destructive behavior. For that, we have to go to the New Testament. We have a look at Paul, the Apostle Paul, in Acts chapter 9. In Acts chapter 9, we have Paul, who called himself the Pharisee of Pharisees of the tribe of Benjamin. He had sat as a student under the Bible man, Gamaliel. Gamaliel was probably the greatest rabbi of Paul's day. And even history knows him today. And Paul studied under Gamaliel. But he didn't like this movement of Christians. And in fact, he was behind the stoning of Stephen in Acts chapter 7. And to make things worse, he got permission to go to Damascus to arrest Christians and bring them back to Jerusalem to bring them to book. But on the way, man plans his course, but God determines his steps. As we sang the song, Jehovah has the last say. So as Paul was on his way to Jerusalem, on his way to Damascus, a flash of lightning and crash of thunder, and a voice tells Paul, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. Well, Paul learned three things about that vision, or about that appearance of the Lord. First of all, he learned Jesus really is the Messiah. Second thing he learned, that Jesus really has risen from the dead. And thirdly, being such, Jesus was the Lord of the world. Put that together with all his Bible knowledge that he learned from Gamaliel, and he realized Jesus is the Lord and Savior of the world. If you confess Jesus as Lord and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And like he says in Galatians, I didn't consult with anyone. That appearance of the Lord on the Damascus road made everything clear. So Paul, in his destruction of the church, actually becomes the pillar, and much of our New Testament is actually Paul. Our foundation, our doctrinal foundation, is from the book of Romans, from Paul. Like it says in Proverbs 21:1, the king's heart is in the hands of the Lord. As the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. And that's what happened to Paul. His heart was turned from destroying the church to building the church. So sometimes God will intervene when our behavior is destructive. He'll bring something into our life to change our way. Well, another way that God can direct our steps is by guiding us to our final goal in life. And for that we need to look at Peter in John chapter 21. Remember, Peter was the one that boldly said to the Lord at the Last Supper, Lord, although all fall away, I will not fall away. And then he ended up denying the Lord 3 times. Well, now it's Jesus has been appearing to his disciples, and they've gone to Galilee, and they've gone fishing, and catch nothing. You can sense the discouragement in Peter's his life. He's left, he's denied the Lord. I'm done. I'll go back to fishing again. And then even fishing, he's unsuccessful. Well, somebody on the bank said, hey, throw your net on the other side of the boat. So they do, and they catch a big fish, a big net of fish. 153 fish they catch. I'm not sure what the significance of that number is, but it is interesting that they give us the exact number. 153 fish they caught. Then Jesus faces Peter with his denial. He says, okay, Peter, do you really love me more than these? Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And 3 times Jesus said that. Then the 3rd time, he tells Peter something. In chapter 21 of John, in verse 18, he says, I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Now, the early church always understood this verse as crucifixion. There's a church tradition that Peter somehow ended up in Rome as the leader of the church in Rome. Now, under the Emperor Nero, persecution started against the Christians. According to the Roman historians, most of the city of Rome burned, and as a result, many people were believing that it was Nero himself that started the fire so that he could clear out an area for himself to build a new and big palace. So to scotch the rumor, what did he do? He blamed the Christians. After all, weren't they teaching hellfire? So this is the Christians that have done this. And the persecution against Christians began. Well, about this time, Peter decided it's probably a good time to leave town. With persecution, and he's the leader of the group. The Pope, you might say, as some people would say, which I have no problem with. It's just after that I have the problem. But Peter left town. And as he was leaving, according to the church tradition, he met the Lord. And Peter was absolutely shocked and confused. So he said, Lord, quo vadis? And that is the Latin word for where are you going? And Jesus says, I'm going back to Rome to be crucified again. Well, Peter got the message. He turned around and he went back to Rome to serve the Lord, to serve the church. And eventually, yes, he was taken and crucified, according to church tradition, crucified upside down. In conclusion, I would just like to read something I just picked up on the internet. It is important to always know where we are going in life. What is the end goal? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we doing? Quo vadis? Where are you going? So you are here at Kest. You're getting a good, solid education. I would guess, if I were to think, this is probably the best institution to get solid Bible in the country. So, yeah, you're small, but don't worry about smallness, because when they rebuilt the second temple in the days of Zerubbabel, the people were weeping because it was so small. And the prophet said, don't weep. God's going to do something big through this temple someday. And he did. The Messiah himself came to that temple. So it's important to make a plan, to plan your course in your life. But always be ready for God to intervene and change your ways, change your steps. Maybe like Joseph, he's going to bring you through painful times. Maybe like Ezekiel, he's going to change your career. That's what happened to me. I was an engineer working for Boeing Airplane Company. How did I ever end up in Africa? Or maybe destructive behavior, or we're heading in the wrong path. Sometimes God will do something, bring something in our life, an accident, sickness, or something to get us back on the right road. And he finally, he will guide us even to the day of our death. Like it says in Psalm 139:16, he's ordained every day of our life. It's written in his book. From the day we were born to the day we die. Every day of your life, God he knows what it will be. So a ship that doesn't move can't be steered. So you do need to make a plan. And I'm believing that's why you're here at this school. And so I encourage you, as Peter said to Jesus, quo vadis. Jesus says, I'm going to Rome to be crucified again. And Peter knew what that message meant. I need to go back to Rome and serve the church, no matter what. And that's you too. Each one of you here. You need to go back to Rome, or wherever God leads you, wherever your Rome is, and serve the Lord, regardless of the consequences. Amen.